I'm Alfonso Winker.
And I'm Trina Olson. And together, we're the co-founders of Team Dynamics.
And this is Behave.
Trina, it occurs to me, something we've mentioned sort of offhanded before on Behave, but haven't really dug into is the fact that while all of this is happening around us, and by this I mean a global crisis and a pandemic, we're actually writing a book.
Yeah, we were actually supposed to be finishing writing a book, but that is proving harder these days, these times, this week even.
Last July, you started putting some words down on paper for a book that we are calling Hiring Revolution, a step-by-step guide to disrupt racism and sexism in the workplace.
Yeah, it's a mouthful, but it's also really full in our brains. And in fact, we finally came up with that title after a lot of iterations, driving for 2.5 hours back when driving was a thing we could all do. In a 17-minute voice note, we found that title. It was in there somewhere. We just had to dig.
It was really fun to just sort of free flow and talk about all these ideas that were emerging for us. And the book really came from, the ideas in the book are ours. And
Yes.
A lot of it has to do with, for you, the surprising volume of hiring that you've done, given the number of campaigns that you've worked on. So sort of the quick, rapid succession hiring you've had to do. My work, who we're hiring and saying, gosh, we could have done better.
Right. And the reason we're bringing this up to our Behave listeners today isn't to sell the book because, friends, we're not there yet. We're not even done writing the book. It's to actually talk about how me as a white woman, you as a man of color, are trying to write this together. And it is because we believe the value in our perspective is going to make for a stronger output, outcome, impact. But right now we are struggling a little bit. We're not lost, we're not confused, but this is really hard and we're finding it hard in a unique way. And so we know that a lot of workplaces have been sort of obsessively talking about transparency and leadership. And so one of the things we really believe in is that the goal is that we're all growing all the time and that the mythology for leaders to be perfect or unflappable isn't doing anybody any favors. So we're going to talk about, and this is really in process, so we'll come back and give y'all updates as we make progress. We're going to talk about how our cultural patterning, the ways we think about ourselves, the ways we think about our work, the ways we've tried to work together, the ways we're needing to find new ways to work together to do this well, are all sort of front and center for us because this is one of the juiciest projects that we're working on during the pandemic.
So I think there's 3 things that we'll want to talk about, and I'll flag those, and then we'll take a break and come back. But I think those 3 things are, 1, a lesson we're learning about how people who are already in deep relationship doing a new thing might have to reestablish shared meaning. 2, how we are uncovering and undoing cultural patterns that we have around hiring. And 3, the lenses of identity that are really present or salient for us in doing this work.
Okay, those 3 sound good to me. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Hey there, Behave listeners. This is producer Levi. Just dropping in a quick note to let you know that during the global pandemic, we will continue to record remote episodes. We will be releasing them at a slightly different pace and schedule, so we will not be necessarily on our every other Wednesday schedule. We are trying to be dynamic and agile as things come up and respond to those things. We strongly encourage you to subscribe to the podcast if you have not already. We really appreciate you listening and hope you are having as good a day as you can. Thanks.
And we're back. The first thing we're going to dig into is lessons we are learning about the process of continuing to discover and navigate and negotiate shared meaning. We believe this could be really relevant to you as a listener because so many of us work with colleagues over a period of time, over a set of projects, And come to find out, the same ways of working together don't get us to all of our goals. When we shift projects, when we are in a new headspace or life space as our relationships grow, we have the opportunity to miss each other, which thankfully for us has created an opportunity to know each other more deeply. So, Alfonso, do you want to let our listeners know where we're getting stuck and what we're trying to break through right now?
Yes. So we are two people that have definitely rumbled on issues, and we've had big disagreements. We've had really messy conflicts. We've had times when we've had to take a break from each other and say, let's cool off and come back to each other. And I was feeling really good about having all of those practices going into writing a really big thing.
Kind of, didn't it feel like that should be enough? It felt like it
It
should
felt
have.
like, yes, we gassed up the tank. We are so ready. All we ever do is talk about like my misogyny and your racism. It's
Yeah.
great. Like we know how to do it. But guess what? Neither one of us have ever written a book before. So we had a whole plan and we had a whole way we were going to do it. And we kept saying things to each other about how it was. And then we were deciding that those phrases meant certain things. So one of the things I kept saying was, well, you'll just write the whole first draft. I will look at it. I'll add some stories. I'll add some quotes. I'll really be the person that kind of writes all the activities because it's going to be an interactive book. And then we'll be ready to send the manuscript off to our publishing partner at Wise Inc. And Trina, when I was saying that, what were you saying to me?
I was saying that all sounds good, and this is now 82,000 words, and it's really long and cumbersome, and it's complicated, and I need your help. I need your brain on figuring out the order. I need help figuring out where the redundancies are and helping pick the best examples. And this is messy, and I'm going to hand you a messy thing.
So I just kept saying back, yeah, I'll just add my parts. I probably need about 3 or 4 whole days to go through all of those words and do all those things, and it'll be fine. So I got
I'm laughing now because like hearing that now, we both should have been like, that sounds nutty, doesn't it? That doesn't sound quite right. But in the moment, I thought, yeah, you are really fast. You're really smart. You're really fast. You edit my stuff constantly, right? We're writing stuff for clients all the time. And I just thought, okay, he's going to like bear down. Wow, I must be really slow.
And I was like, yeah, Trina's like an excellent writer. We in our previous jobs, we had written a couple of reports together, so I sort of knew about your writing process. Not thinking, oh, those reports were all less than 30 pages,
right?
And primarily lit reviews and analyzing data and other research, not original thinking that was supposed to be co-authored by two people who'd never written a book before. So I got through 3 of my 4 days. And I came to you and I said, hey, I need to have a conversation about the book. It's feeling really new, so I'm not sure how to do this. So I want to tell you some of the things that I love about it. And then I want to tell you what's hard for me. So I told you a few of the things that I loved. And I knew that you like really specific feedback. So I named sections, I named anecdotes. I read some of it back to you. And then I said, this is really hard. I'm stuck. I'm pretty angry and I'm a little disappointed. And I talked to you about all the places where I was feeling stuck and angry and disappointed. And then you said, okay, can we just breathe? And then we breathed.
Yeah, I literally said that. I was sitting on the floor and I was like, hang on, because I'm not going to hang up on you. That's not a thing I do. And I believed everything you were saying. It was really hard to hear. And it was sort of a long time in coming. So at the same time, I was feeling like relief that we were going to finally address wherever it is that we were stuck. But also it's like, ouch, 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 ouch. Your opinion matters a lot to me. So you being disappointed in me hurts in a particular way. So breathing was the only thing I knew how to do.
Yeah. And I, of course, I had notes. I had worked with, we have a spiritual director, a coach that we work with. And I had worked with her the day before to help me get ready. And I had my notes and I said, I'm going to read something because I want to make sure I say all of it. And I said, I'm not giving up on us. I'm not giving up on you. I'm not giving up on this project. I'm still in it, and I want us to find some shared meaning, which was sort of the breakdown to the breakthrough that I feel like let us say, like, oh, what I meant when I was saying that was blah, right?
Right. Yeah, we both got the opportunity to really take responsibility and hear in a new way. And for listeners who may think this sounds like a little hippy dippy, we've always said to you at Behave, we're going to share with you behaviors we are trying in real time. And for us, it's not about overly processing or trying to be each other's therapist. We never do that. We don't sort of break those boundaries, but it's about saying, we're not going to leave a conversation wondering if we're okay. It actually gets us farther faster by being able to name that, and also being able to say, because we care so much about our goals of an excellent work product, we're not going to let something that's not excellent go out the door. So that's not on the table as an option. So if that's not on the table as an option and this isn't excellent yet, we got some wrestling to do.
And then we made a plan to get back together the next Monday. And I, as the person who had sort of paused my portion, said, I'm not going to work on it for a few days. I'm going to come back with a few asks and a few offers of how I think I can still be responsible and accountable to the portion that I'm supposed to be doing right now. So we came back. I had a few suggestions. Trina had a few suggestions to my suggestions, and we made a whole new plan that actually extended our timeline, and I think is going to get us closer to the final product we really want.
Yeah, and to land the plane on some of the lessons we've been saying that we've learned just in these past 2 weeks include, I was trying to ask for help, you were trying to ask for help, and come to find out that wasn't specific enough, right? So I was trying to be clear by saying things like, I'm going to hand you something messy. And you were hearing, you always say that and your stuff is pretty clean, right? So it's like, oh, shoot, what kind of help? And how to say when things are hard in a different way. Hard how, right? What does that mean? When I say stuck where? Stuck on what? And so not to spend time over justifying or sort of puffing ourselves up to defend or protect, but to actually do the vulnerable thing. And, for my ego, I had to say to you out loud, I'm still really smart and I am a good writer. And this is hard in a new way, right? Because I had to hold on to the fact that, like, what does this mean about me as a contributor, as a leader, as a business partner, as somebody who said yes to this project, right? So we know that for leaders, for workers, going down a shame spiral doesn't help get the work done. But sometimes being able to name, this is a hard thing. This doesn't mean I'm not good. It just means this product isn't good yet. And because you and I have a shared value of tenacity, we know that we're going to keep going till it gets good. And so I think for me, it was really like a clearing conversation. And now we don't necessarily have answers yet around, so how do we say hard how, or how do we describe what stuck is and how you can help me in a shared project? But we're working on it. So that idea that we used to say those things and knew what they meant. And for this project, we're going to have to get more specific.
Yeah, and I think it's going to help us. I think that moment, and you always say breakdown to breakthrough, and it really did feel like a breakdown that led to a breakthrough. Like, I think it's going to help us as people that work together all the time on new stuff to slow down and stay in that we talk about describe, interpret, evaluate all the time, to really help us stay and describe longer with each other so that we don't take shorthand for granted.
Right. And I think also, way too often we see when folks are struggling to feel as though it's person A versus person B, when in fact we really got clear it's person A and B against the problem. We are on the same team. So this isn't about fighting to do it my way or fighting to do it your way, but it's about saying the way that makes sense to me and the way that makes sense to you isn't creating the thing we want. So we're going to have to make some new sense. I'm curious for you, what you want to share with listeners about the cultural patterns that you found coming up that contributed to some of the anger and frustration and disappointment, and just some of the noticings you've had about why or how have former patterns of working impacted how you are proceeding and getting stuck on this book project.
Yeah, so there's three words that are coming up for me that are related to I think survive like workplace survival strategies that I've developed. I have
Mm.
been, as we've talked about, the youngest, the gayest, the brownest, the firstest on a lot of teams in my work, and I have often been praised for my ability to perform whiteness and masculinity, even when that's going against some of my own values or some of my own desires for doing work a different way.
Will you paint a picture for our listeners of just what that means, whether it's how you've talked or what you've worn or how you've behaved? Because I think performing whiteness is obviously a big conversation. Can you just give folks a flavor of what you've been praised for?
For me, it has been, I've been praised for really knowing how to switch my language depending on if I'm talking to sort of an activist community or a board of directors.
Mm.
So rather than fluidly moving through my day using the words that are most comfortable to me, I would, in a lot of my roles, consciously shift my cadence, my tone, or the kinds of words that I would use depending on my audience, less to be strategic. I think word choice and way of speaking is can be strategic, but I wasn't adapting. I was assimilating. I was trying to be more like the rooms that I was in. The second is for most of my time in philanthropy, I tucked in a button up shirt and for big meetings or important meetings would put on a blazer. I am not comfortable in a tucked in shirt. The way my body is shaped and sized and the way those things are cut makes me feel restricted. I'm also a sweaty person, so those shirts don't even look nice on me for very long because moisture creates wrinkles.
Yeah.
So those are
Right,
just some
but
of
you
the
wore
things.
the uniform essentially. You
I
were
wore the
able to put the
uniform for
uniform
sure.
on. Yeah.
So three things were coming up for me, and they were control, sequence, and order. So I think, and we've referenced this article from Tema Okun around white dominant culture before, and there's a lot in there about perfection and speed. And for me, I'm used to doing things in sort of a sequential order, really fast, and in a way that I can control and that feels orderly. And so part of the mental and emotional wrestle of looking at the draft and one really not doing a thing we do that is receive and believe, but and then checking if I'm receiving correctly. I just kept telling myself this is going to be in an order. It is going to be a sequence that makes sense to my brain, and I'm going to be able to control what this experience was. So because it was words from the top to the bottom of a page from left to right, I was really thinking that this was going to be something that would read like a final thought rather than these are all the ideas Trina had. What other ideas do I have, and how do these ideas go together? So I had to get over a pattern that wasn't serving me. I couldn't just treat this like an existing draft of something. This was ideas in a form that looked familiar, but in fact was really unfamiliar to me. And I'm curious for you, Trina, like what are the patterns that you are uncovering or noticing that you carried with you through the writing process?
Yeah, as you were talking, I was finding myself needing to just breathe again because I am 39 years old. I am about 20 years into my working life. I really started my career in the middle of college, which I feel really grateful for to have had this much experience by this age. But I was falling back into defend and protect because as I'm thinking about and sort of having flashbacks of the patterns and the moments in which I've been a leader, I feel like I have spent a lot of my professional life defending how I think. So sometimes I describe it as like I think in webs or I do big bursts of work, and often been told by more masculine presenting people, some who were born and raised female, some who were born and raised male, that my way doesn't make sense. And that's always hurt my feelings. And so I get pretty big and pretty righteous about sort of like picture 3-year-old Trina with her hands on her hips saying, well, this makes sense to me. So now who's the dumb one, right? Like I get real feisty because I feel really vulnerable or like the way that I think is code for other people that I'm not smart enough. And so one of the things I'm actually remembering is I followed in my sister's footsteps and did most of what she did in middle school and high school. She got into music, so I got into music. She got into theater, I got into theater. She did mock trial and competitive speaking, I did it too. So we had different categories, we had different coaches, we were doing it at different times. But I remember on the score sheets, when I was doing speaking, which is like related to debate but different, I was in a category called great speeches, where you do a snippet of a speech and then you also give analysis. The kinds of feedback I would get as a 14, 15, and 16-year-old girl were often about my appearance, and were, although I was more prepared or memorized first, something about the way I laid out my argument folks often had trouble with, right? So I've always sort of felt like I've been making my case a little bit wrong. And so I think one of the ways that's played out is you and I talked about how much longer than necessary the section of the book is that makes the case, because I tend to jump to making a case. And so I'm noticing that arising and really needing to sort of sink into the fact that you do believe that I'm smart. You don't think my way is wrong, but we are really clear that we think differently. So how can we lean into that as an asset? And so that idea that it's not just about this project, we always say our workers bring their whole entire lives up until this moment to their work. That's absolutely true for me. So I'm carrying around 20 years of baggage of who has ever told me I've written well and who has told me I don't. And that's really real. And so it's important to recognize how that shows up, so that I'm also not putting all of that baggage on you and on us, because you haven't said those things to me. So it's not fair for me to pretend that you have.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So with our last little bit, let's pivot to identity. As you are writing, Trina, and as we are thinking about this book and talking with our publishing partner at Wise Inc. and previewing it for our team and for our clients, which of your identities is feeling particularly present or salient for you? Or how are you, through which lenses of identity are you experiencing the work of the book?
Yeah, so I'm really thinking about two of my sort of target identities and two of my agent identities. And by that we mean in US culture, the two identities that get sort of a free ride all the time, even though there's nothing special that I'm doing to be praised for those identities. And then two identities that are often top of mind because they get pinched first, or, it's how I feel like I'm getting talked down to or talked around. So the two target identities that I'm really, really conscious of are being a woman. And so even digging into some of the research around wealth disparities and hiring disparities has just been maddening, and really thinking about what it has been like to be a woman my whole life and to have big jobs and to be responsible for hiring. So I've been thinking about that a lot. And then interestingly, this target identity for me of being an unmarried, gay, 39-year-old woman without kids, meaning a lot of how women in the workplace are talked about is related to an experience that I'm not having or don't currently have, right? And so this idea of the assumptions people make about why women aren't able to make it up into the higher echelons, kind of what that looks like. So it's this mashup, but I'm really thinking about the ways in which me experiencing my white ladiness at 39 is different than how a lot of other people are experiencing those same identities. And then the agent identities that I'm super, super conscious of are my whiteness, and really thinking about how preferences for whiteness have been baked in, and feeling really self-conscious about all the ways that I got pushed into the front of a hiring line and got believed, even though I had no business being believed or hired for that job. But I was able to sort of, through whiteness and bravado, be able to say, oh yeah, I've got it. So I was able to perform appropriately in a hiring process to get some big jobs. And then also thinking about class, right? So right now I'm a CEO, and it's all well and good to talk about hiring when you're the person doing most of the hiring. I don't plan on ever getting hired again for the rest of my life. That's my truth. I don't know that I've said that out loud before, but part of the process of creating our own business is that I'm in control of where I work. The truth is, every single day we are being hired or not by clients. So we're in interview processes all the time, but it's not about my job. It's about the clients that we're going to take on. So those are the identities that I think are really, really coming up for me. How about you?
For me, I'm thinking about my lived experience as a person of color. And in this context, it feels important to say, being mixed, raised by one white parent and one parent of color, being light skinned. So that's playing into it for me. And then really thinking about being a cisgender man, a baby who's assigned male at birth and has lived as a boy and then a man. Interestingly enough, for me, my connection to, or what's resonating for me around being a person of color while doing this writing is the idea of enoughness. So,
Mm,
am I a person of color enough to be making commentary on what hiring practices look like and how hiring practices are racist? So, I'm having sort of a who am I moment when in fact I'm someone that spent a lot of my career thinking about leadership development and workforce development and have really studied it, have interacted with it, have done a decent volume of hiring through a fellowship program that I used to run. And I'm not necessarily saying that I have practiced in my history all the things we are writing about, but I am someone who's been close to hiring a bunch.
right.
And I'm continually wondering if I am sort of brown enough to be making this commentary, which I think is part of how white supremacy works. We're supposed to second guess what we just know to be our truth and our lived experiences as people of color. The second thing, or second element of identity that I'm really thinking about is the idea that I am a cisgender man. I am a president of a company alongside you. And it is hard to be honest about all the places where masculinity gets preferenced and then to look at the words that are sort of coming out of my fingertips and onto the screen or things that I'm reading that you've written and saying, oh, and I've absolutely benefited and I've absolutely
Mm,
coached people to perform in these ways. Or it's pretty easy for me to look at these things and say, those are patterns of masculinity that get preferenced, but it's harder to say, oh, and I benefit from them and I actually perform them probably on a daily basis if I don't catch myself. So those are two of the things that are coming up for me.
yeah, and I would also say, we've talked a little bit about how our identities have come up with each other, and again, we're pretty practiced at that. But we've been able to sort of name out loud in the past couple of weeks that one of the things that was feeling itchy for me is because women in the workplace are often asked to do a lot of caretaking. That it was my job to present you something beautiful and then apologize when it wasn't. So that idea of like, oh, I didn't take care of this project or of our relationship or of what you asked for well enough. And so now I have something to apologize about. So I think I've just been really conscious that sometimes, whether it's the emotional labor in the workforce or just the cadence of how group projects have happened since like middle school, right? It's like who's
Right.
responsible for making sure it's good and ready, and then who gets to just sort of contribute at the end. And then also in the same way as you were talking about this idea that, from one vantage point, I'm really talking about a part of my identity that I know. But as we were doing our research, right, the difference is making the difference in the workforce in America right now are race and gender. And as a white person, that idea of, how can I be a useful, helpful contributor? What business do I have? But also really being able to name whiteness and identity and experience so that folks can understand from our lived experience how these things have played out and how they're real and about how none of us are above them because the system's so big. So it's been complex and new, and thank you for thinking about sharing it even though it feels vulnerable and funny.
Yeah, well, I just want to close by, thanking you and having just a ton of gratitude for our past practices that got us as far as they could and got us to at least the point where I was able to go ask for help from our coach and then could come to you with some thoughts. And I'm also grateful for our practice of really dealing with impact. So knowing that there are absolutely gendered and raced reasons why we are experiencing this process as we are experiencing it and not needing to put a Band-Aid over it or pretend like it's not having the impact that it has. So I'm grateful for that practice, and I'm hopeful that you, our listener, can find something in here to remember that even when you are in long-term relationship with someone and you are used to doing work with them, a new moment, new conditions, a new project really present opportunity to come all the way back to shared meaning and culture and identity.
Thank you. I wish we were in person so I could give you a high five right now.
Oh, that would be great.
That'd be great. Someday. It's coming. I can feel it.
So we're curious, friends, how are you rumbling with newness at the intersection of culture and identity? Send us a tweet, like always, at Behave Podcast. We hope you're taking good care, washing your hands, and make good choices.
I know. I obsessively think about Sweden. I know that that's what you're going to put at
Because
the
of how
end
you
now
are.
of this goddamn episode.